If you work in IT long enough, eventually you are going to make a mistake. And I'm talking about a big mistake, something that impacts your users and maybe even your company's customers. So today I'm going to tell you the story of the time that I double billed over 30,000 customers while working at a small company, which was over a $500,000 mistake. Now in this story, we have to jump back to around 2010, maybe a little bit before that. I was running my first time as the director of an IT department. The buck stopped with me when it came to our entire software development stack. And this was an insurance company. It was a small company. It was just coming out of early stage startup phase, and there was a lot of opportunity to build new applications and automate a lot of processes to really help this company scale. And this was an exciting job for me because when you're in larger corporate environments, you often don't get to have what we call greenfield applications where you're starting from scratch. You're usually extending or building onto other applications that already exist. So this job was really exciting to me, and I was making a big impact at this company. And what I was doing at the time was automating the subscription billing process for the policies at the insurance company. Because like a lot of small companies back in the day, what they were doing was exporting the billing information to a CSV, separated values file, and they were uploading it via secure FTP to the payment processing bank. And then the bank would process that file. It would spit out a results file, which they would then have to go through, check, and then re-upload into their database, which was a very time-consuming and human-intensive process. Now, we were going to implement an API so that the system could just run a batch job and run all these transactions through the API so that a human would never have to touch them. This would be more accurate, it would be faster, and it would be much more scalable as this business grew. And these are the types of jobs, like if you go work for an enterprise company or a startup or a small medium business, these are the types of things that software developers do. There was no interface. There was no pretty web application to be built. There is a lot of code in this world that lives under the tip of the iceberg that makes all of the apps and things that you see visually work. And there's a lot more of that code than there is of UI code. But anyway, I digress. So here we are, we're working late, we're getting ready to launch this process, and all I need to do is queue up the people that need to be billed. And I had written a small SQL script to do this. And the one thing about SQL is when you have joins and relational data, a join will create a row for every matching record. So if you don't filter it properly or you join without being mindful of certain conditions, you can get duplicate data. And that's what happened to me. I ran the query to queue up the people to be billed, and it looked good at a glance. Mistake number one, I did not build a validation test to check the data that I had just put into the table. Again, first director job, filled with pride and hubris, I neglected proper testing. So process kicked off, the billing started running, I checked the table, everything looked good, I went home for a good night's sleep. And nobody knew that there was a problem until confused and angry customers started calling in the morning. So as an IT professional, what do you do when something like that happens? I mean, I'm driving into work the next day. I get a call on my cell phone from the CFO of the company, says, hey, something's going wrong with billing. There's customers calling in. They've been double billed. Our customer service representatives are checking their accounts. It looks like they've been double billed. What's going on? Now, I'm in the car. I can't really do anything about this right now. So step one is to just own it. Okay, clearly there's a problem. I'm driving into the office. I should be there in another 30 minutes. I'm going to dig in and I'm going to find out what's wrong. You don't make excuses. You don't speculate. One thing I've learned throughout my career is that when you're talking to non-technical stakeholders, they don't want conjecture. They're not really interested in that. They want to know the scope of the problem and they want it fixed. So if you don't have the information, don't BS. Don't make stuff up. Just acknowledge that there's a problem. You're going to look into it. Give them a time frame. I'm going to be in the office in 30 minutes. I'm going to look at it right away. I've heard you. Now, the second step in a situation like this is to measure it. The minute I got to the office, I jumped into the computer, opened the database, and I started writing queries to determine how many people had actually been double billed and what the scope of the problem was. And I was able to do that because we had good logging in our database. We had timestamps and things like that. So I was very easily able to select the customers that ran in the billing job last night. And I was able to use grouping and sorting to figure out who had been double billed and who had not, because it was not everybody. It was only the certain customers that had failed that particular join by getting more data than we should have. And now that I understood the full scope of the problem, I was able to make a plan. And I did this before I went back to the CFO, because again, they're looking to you for solutions. They're looking for you to have a plan. They don't understand how the systems work, and they really don't care. They just want the problem fixed. So now that I knew which customers had been affected, and I knew why the bad join, I was able to make a plan. So first things first, we fixed the SQL procedure that was doing that. So that was taken care of. And then we had to decide how to refund all these customers. Now, in our user interface that the customer service representatives used, they were able to refund transactions, one at a time. But there were like 30,000 customers that were double billed. So it was 15,000 potential refunds. That's way too many to do by hand. So we had to come up with a plan. And in this case, because they were transactions, and when you process a transaction through an API, you usually get some kind of transaction confirmation or some kind of ID from the payment provider that identifies that particular transaction. So we were able to write a query to pull those IDs out. And then we wrote a very small batch job that would go through, loop through those transactions and refund them to the customer. And that wasn't something that was built into our software. That was a quick batch job that we had to write on our own. Now, because we used good coding practices and we had all of our logic separated into different DLLs and things like that, we already had the capabilities to refund a transaction in our code stack, in our libraries. So we were able to reference that. The only custom code we really wrote was to open up the file where we had exported all the transactions IDs and just loop through it and call that refund transaction method that we had already tested. And it was successfully able to refund all of those customers. But before we went about building that, I had the plan, I had the measure, I went to the stakeholders in the business, I told them what happened, I told them what we did to fix it so it wouldn't happen again, and I told them what we were going to do to fix the problem for all the customers. So the moral of this story is when, not if, but when you make a mistake as an IT person, the steps are to own it, and then you measure it, and then you plan it, and then you communicate it, you execute the plan, and then at the end, you should really do a post-mortem and figure out what you can do better in the future so that problems like that don't reoccur. And in this case, we decided to put in some procedures whenever we were dealing with sensitive information that would upset people if something went wrong, where we would have an extra checking process and do some verification and integration tests, which we were missing before. And at the end of the day, everything turned out okay. The majority of the customers didn't even notice that they got double billed because we were able to fix it so quickly. And the ones that did notice, they got handled by customer service. Because we had measured it, we were able to send an email to the impacted customer, just letting them know that if they saw like two bills and a refund, here's what happened, it's been fixed. If there's any other problems, just contact us. So everything was nicely wrapped up. And I hope this story helps you if you're a young or aspiring IT professional When we talk about the term professionalism, that's the kind of things we're talking about. Mistakes are going to happen, and when they happen, how you react to those mistakes is going to determine how other people view you as a professional. Can you own the problem? Can you stay calm? Can you fix things? Can you own that mistake and analyze it fairly and make it better? In this case, it was my failing as a leader because we did not have good testing processes in place around that. That was my fault. And I never threw any of my team members under the bus or shifted blame or anything like that. The buck stopped with me. But when you bring a plan and you bring a solution and you have a way to remediate it going forward, people will generally maintain their respect for you and continue working with you. Happy coding.